Hi, my name is Dr. Vince Moses. This is the inaugural exhibition, Still I Rise, the Black I.E. Fight for Justice. My wife, Kate Whitmore, and I were privileged, in fact honored, to be asked to serve as curators for this initial exhibition, to work with the Riverside African American Historical Society exhibit team, and then with Black Voice News and the Story Maps team. So this is really a cooperative effort. But when Kate and I started thinking about how we would approach the exhibition, based on Maya Angelou's great poem, her fabulous poem, Still I Rise, it occurred to us, especially to me, that the Civil Rights Institute is not a reliquary. It's not a history museum. It's a living enterprise to create good trouble. And the poem, we think, really encapsulated all of that. Still I rise. That there may be obstacles, that in history, systemic racism, bigotry, dictated how, through legislation and through actions of human beings, dictated how the world operated. And what we wanted to show is that some of those same kind of battles are still going today. But specifically for this inaugural exhibition, we wanted to deal with the Black struggle, the Black fight for justice, and in particular, the Black fight for justice in the Inland Empire. And the way we were going to do that is to set a historical context that began with the end of radical Reconstruction in 1877, where the federal troops were all pulled out of the Deep South, the Confederacy, and the rise of Jim Crow then began to weigh down on the gains of the Black community in the South, who had just gained the right to vote in many of these states and local elections, at least Black men, and had taken over representative leadership in cities and in states. So that Jim Crow then began to retract all of those. And then the Ku Klux Klan, violence of the period, weighed so heavily on freed Black men and women in the South that they began to look for places to go to be able to escape. And the Great West, in the minds of many, was the promised land. It was a brand new state, a brand new place where they, in fact, could build a place, build a home, and escape the kind of violence and the kind of oppression that they found in the Deep South. So the introduction of this exhibition lays that stage, but it was hard. That in fact, Black migrants to California found something like a Western Jim Crow. They had to fight battles against redlining of neighborhoods. They had to fight battles against discrimination in all areas of life. And while we're setting that stage, we're also establishing that there were successes. There were victories. And that's what this is about, to show those kind of obstacles, those kind of victories, the kind of battles, but then to indicate that the fight goes on even today, that justice is not absolutely achieved for a perfect union. In the process of laying out this historical context, we found one object that we felt kind of identified the whole frame of the exhibition. And in this case, it was a cauldron that belonged to an enslaved woman in Georgia whose family moved to Riverside in 1926 and brought that cauldron with them. Well, the Promised Land is also represented by the mural that we present just to the left as you enter the exhibition, and that's the Reverend W.G. Goodwin and his bride, Elizabeth Boswell, who are married in a Riverside orange grove in 1895. The potential of California is represented in that marriage, and that marriage too represents the creation of family, the creation of community. And that's where we wanted to go next in the exhibition, was to establish how that community developed in the Inland Empire and what the pillars were that held that community up. We must acknowledge, because they deserve it, all the credit in the world for having sponsored, supported the exhibition financially. That's the Riverside African American Historical Society, the number of banks in the area, Bank of America, Altura Credit Union, name it, and individuals who lent us photographs and artifacts, gave us the right, the permission to use illustrations and photographs that we could place in the exhibition, both as murals and framed photos. So it was a real team effort. It was a real community effort. This is the brainchild of Rose Mays, who's the executive director of the Riverside County Office of Fair Housing and the kind of founder of the Riverside African American Historical Society, and Dr. Lalit Acharya, who was a longtime resident of Riverside and worked for the mayor's office, among other things. And in preparing the exhibit, I made contact with my good friend, Dr. Lonnie Bunch, about how we should structure and create the framework for this exhibit. And he sort of suggested to us that there were several pillars of community for African Americans. And one or two of them are here, and we'll look at them. The first is the church, the Black church. Another pillar, significant pillar of Black community, was the creation of self-help organizations. These kind of mirrored the white community, and we're going to see how they changed during the mid-century, 20th century civil rights movement. But these self-help organizations were a hallmark of creating Black community in the Inland Empire as well as around the country. And they included, we have some modern ones here, but they included, of course, the NAACP. They included Black sororities and fraternities. Happen to have Alpha Kappa Alpha, San Bernardino division, I think here. Kamala Harris today was a member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha. It's one of those kind of self-help organizations that growing up out of college, university experience. A third pillar, important pillar of creating the Black community and stabilizing it and keeping it formed is the Black press. The Black press still serves the same purpose today. It's moved into the digital era, as you see Dr. Paulette Brown Hines, who owns Voice Media Ventures. It's an offshoot of the new version of the Black Voice News. My friends Cheryl and Hardy Brown, who were the founders of the Black Voice News, because of their work, they were inducted into the Gallery of Greats, the leading Black press organization in the United States. It's a voice for the Black community. It's a pillar of the Black community. We have a photograph of Mr. Townsend, who founded the Precinct Reporter out of San Bernardino. It's still a major Black paper of the Inland Empire. We even set the historical stage by showing the first newspaper in the Inland Empire, and that was the Colored Citizen in Redlands, 1905, first Black paper in the Inland Empire. You know, the Black I.E. fight for justice actually began with a home, of the capacity to have a place to live, to build a home, and we wanted to focus on that and how the I.E. Black community struggled against that obstacle and succeeded against that obstacle, even sometimes within redlined districts. But in order to show how the fight for home, to build a home, happened over time, in this particular display, we backed these artifacts with a mural of the Azer B. Randolph family in 1918 coming out for the Armistice Day celebration in Riverside. That's the end of World War I. And with them in their Sunday finest, they owned their own home on the east side, it's segregated east side in Riverside, California. But standing in front of them now are shows of success. We have a traditional wedding dress, a 1938 wedding dress that belonged to Lola Johnson Goff. She was the daughter, by the way, of Reverend Frank Johnson, who sued the city of Riverside over the Fairmount Park plunge. Traditional Anglo-style wedding dress from 1938. Shows how the Black community was succeeding in a kind of a mirror of the dominant white community. But look at this. The wedding dress next to Lola Johnson Goff's garment is from Amina Carter, who was a product of the mid-century civil rights movement and the arrival of kind of Pan-Africanism as a way to sort of help solidify Black identity in the United States. So what you have, instead of a traditional Anglo wedding dress, you have now an Egyptian-esque wedding dress. Her groom, Ratibu Jaycox, wore a Nigerian garment. And their ceremony, this is interesting, I think, their ceremony was presided over by Professor Karinga of Long Beach State University, who founded Kwanzaa. So in the Carter home is also a Kwanzaa altar, references to Kwanzaa, photographs of Professor Karinga. So this, I think, is a very interesting kind of way to bring the fight for justice up through the mid-century civil rights movement as well, and how it influenced many black homes in the Inland Empire. Freed black men and women that came to California in the post-Reconstruction period, the late 19th century, they looked to California as a promised land. And in its own way it was. It had more opportunities. But look, they did not fully escape Jim Crow. The South came with them. They found here a California Ku Klux Klan, not just in Riverside, which was founded by abolitionist judge John Wesley North, but in the 1920s, Riverside had a Klan presence. It even elected a Klan-backed mayor. In Fontana, which happened to be the local home of the Ku Klux Klan, vigilante violence, just like that kind of violence, lynching and cross burnings that were found in the Deep South, happened here. In the late 1940s, an engineer who came to work, a black engineer named O'Day Short, brought his family to Fontana to work at Kaiser Steel as an engineer. He happened to buy property on the wrong side of, I think it was State Street. He was warned to get out. 2 weeks later, 2 sheriff's deputies came to see him to say, you can't live on this side. The militia or the vigilantes will run you out. Not long after that, in the middle of the night, his home caught fire. It was arson. It had been set with the help of kerosene. It burned in a almost superstorm of fire. The family were kind of brought out. He and his wife and his 2 children were dragged out of the house. He was taken to the hospital with severe burns. His wife, his 2 little children, 7 and 10, died from the fire. And while O'Day Short was in the hospital, the district attorney of San Bernardino came to tell him that his family was dead. He died shortly after. They were burned out. They faced the same kind of vigilante violence as in the Deep South, because places here that reflected kind of that Southern influence were dead set on prohibiting black people from moving into white areas. That's what this section of the exhibition is about, is that there was still a battle, a fight to build a home. And by the 1920s, even though Riverside was integrated, when there were just a few black families in town, even San Bernardino, something of the same, by the 1920s, real estate developments were redlined. That is, they put prohibitive clauses in covenants and deeds to prohibit black people and other people of color from buying houses in those areas. So in San Bernardino and Riverside of the Inland Empire, as around the entire state, black neighborhoods interspersed with other peoples of color developed in the 2 cities, Riverside and San Bernardino. I have to tell you, though, the successes within that community showed black agency. They just didn't lie down or sit down because they were restricted to these particular segregated areas. They created a neighborhood. Riverside's east side, San Bernardino's west side had successful businesses, doctors. They had their own kind of real estate agents as well. So there's success within those segregated communities because of black agency. They didn't take it sitting down or lying down. The fight still goes on today. One example is that is fighting for fair rent prices, because real estate companies, developers are out to maximize their profit. So even today, we have the fight for fair housing, both ownership of housing and in rents, that continues into the 21st century. This wall of Post-its is one of my favorite parts of the exhibition. What will you do to fight for justice in the IE, the Inland Empire? I think this is really important because people have experienced the entire exhibition. They've absorbed the framework, the information available, and all the master and sub labels. But now they have their own opportunity to get involved in the fight for justice. And that's to tell us in a few short words what they will now do to commit to that struggle. Well, part of our mandate, given to us by the African Americans Historical Society and sponsored by Black Voice News or Voice Media Ventures, was to put some maps, interactive maps, into this exhibition. And I have to say that I'm really proud of the team that did this. We began with Stephanie Williams of Black Voice News and Voice Media Ventures as this kind of supervisor coordinator of these story maps. And we brought on board, of course, Candace Mays of Voice Media Ventures. And then I was able to attract Jennifer Tilton of the University of Redlands and Cal State University San Bernardino, and Dr. Kathy Gudis, both of them. I have to say, this is one of the most interactive parts of this whole affair. And it helps create the historical context and the stories around the battles and the victories, the failures of this fight for justice in the Inland Empire. They can read narrative, they see historic photographs, and it helps bring the battles that we portray in the exhibition into a historical context. A significant segment of this exhibition is My Name is Taisha, Black Lives Matter 1999. We wanted to bring this into focus to discuss the issue of the fight for justice against unnecessary police violence, against unnecessary violence, even within the Black community itself. In 1998, December 1998, Taisha Miller was unconscious in her car at a Union 76 station down Magnolia Avenue in Riverside. Her cousin called for help. Police officers arrived before an ambulance, before police officers trying to rouse her from her unconscious state in the car, kind of panicked when she reared back in her seat, and they cut loose, firing 23 rounds at her, 3 or 4 of which hit her in the back of the head. She was hit 12 times and died very shortly thereafter on the scene. Well, what happened at that point is that her cousin, the Reverend Burnell Butler of Riverside, well, the fight for justice that Reverend Butler started in early 1999 grew to the point that it attracted nationwide attention of the press and of civil rights leaders. In the meantime, while it was drawing that attention, Andy Roth, who was a civil rights lawyer in Riverside, joined with the firm of Johnny Cochran of Los Angeles and filed a federal civil rights case on behalf of Taisha Miller. They were successful and settled that suit. What we want to talk about mainly is how the Taisha Miller shooting brought the entire nationwide battle against unnecessary police violence toward Black people into focus. This is the Reverend Burnell Butler leading one of the protests, as you can see. And we were very fortunate to make contact with him and obtain his shirt and his reverend's collar as an iconic artifact for this exhibition. The battle for justice for Taisha, with the protest, with the civil rights case, led finally to the Attorney General of the state of California to file a stipulated judgment or a consent decree against the city of Riverside and the police department, which, and here's the success story, it resulted in vast improvements in the way the Riverside Police Department is trained in their use of force, and it led as well to the City Council of Riverside creating the Riverside Citizens Police Review Commission. Well, a major focus of this exhibition obviously is the Black I.E. fight for justice. We wanted to show that that fight was not simply relegated to the Black community. It included all the peoples of color that resided inside some of those segregated communities like the East Side or the West Side, San Bernardino, East Side, Riverside, and that it continues today. So this particular section is intersections in the fight for justice. And we show here how the Black civil rights organizations of the mid-century supported Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers in their battle to gain justice for themselves, for California farm workers, right up to the point where Jose Medina, who was assemblyman representing the city of Riverside and surrounds, led the battle to get the very first mandatory ethnic studies program in the state's high schools, which he succeeded in doing. They passed that bill, and California now has mandatory ethnic studies in high school in order to gain your high school diploma. That shows something of the success of the intersections in the battle for justice, because education is key. You know, Jim Crow applied to entertainment, the entertainment industry, and to sports in the early to mid 20th century. It wasn't until the Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act came along that we began to see change. In the fight for justice in the entertainment industry, we show first the era of segregation with Edgar Hayes, who was trained at Wilberforce University as a classical pianist, who had his own quartet in the 1940s and early 50s. Edgar Hayes played in the era of segregated entertainment and did not rise to the national kind of popularity that he could have achieved today. As an illustration of that, he was the lead performer with his quartet at a white nightclub in Riverside, that happened to be in the Loring Building. And even though he played there as the headliner, he could not stay in a public facility like the Mission Inn or any other motel. Edgar Hayes had to live with a local black family, the Williams family, and this photograph happens to be dedicated to them. And it was because they took him in, he could stay there when he was performing at this white nightclub. We're no longer in this era of kind of segregated entertainment, but trust me, the battle for equity goes on even in entertainment, because Black performers tell me that, and tell us that the white executives in these music companies and movie production have a way of keeping Black entertainers out of the room. It's still a fight. Now we're looking really at three significant Black entertainers that were famous during the era of segregation, as well as the break out of civilization with segregation with the Civil Rights Act and the Civil Rights Movement of mid-century. Clarence Muse was one of the first Black movie stars. He even did a silent movie or two. He wound up being very, very successful because he was a composer as well as a movie star and a businessman. He owned a resort in Lake Elsinore in the pre-World War II period called Muse a while. In fact, Lake Elsinore was really a black resort-owned area until they were driven out by the dominant white sort of business class, because they wanted that property and they wanted to build resorts around Lake Elsinore themselves. Nancy Wilson came up out of that era of segregation into a more open kind of entertainment. She was very successful. And during that era of segregation, we had Black nightclubs. One of them was the Velvet Lounge in San Bernardino that drew the best of Black acts from around the country to San Bernardino to perform in that club. It's now the location of an elementary school. But at the time, it shows you the kind of success within a segregated community that Black agency could bring to bear on that set of conditions. Well, look, the conspiracy of silence continued from entertainment into the sports industry, both college and as well as the professional leagues. We know that before the Civil Rights Act, and before the integration of professional baseball by Jackie Robinson with the Dodgers, Sports, professional sports especially, and even college sports, were segregated. Well, we moved out of that era of segregation. But look, there's still a battle for equity in sports. Here's one of them, a superstar, Kawhi Leonard from Moreno Valley. They're still put upon by economics, and by hidden kind of systemic racist attitudes of owners. One thing about this, I might say that Kawhi Leonard represents one really fabulous superstar black athlete from the Inland Empire, and we wanted to use him as kind of an iconic representation for this battle of equity in sports. And Alex Madison is a great guy. He's a running back for the Minnesota Vikings. High school, grew up in San Bernardino. He's lent us one of his recent league helmets for this exhibition. Well, along with the fight for fair housing, the fight to build a home, is equally as important the fight for a job, the fight for justice in employment and the ability to build a business. In this particular component of the exhibition, we show a mural of success in business within the segregated east side of Riverside. This building is the Mercantile Hall, owned by David Stokes, and his partner Wiley, with a grocery store, a butcher shop, and on the second floor, the home of the Orange Valley Lodge, number 13, colored masons. See, this is the era of segregation. Colored masons, before the African American community took charge of their own naming. But this was a very successful business and local organization, community building organization on the east side and Riverside. But the battle for fair labor standards, as well as for the ability to build a business, continues in Riverside as well as the rest of the state of California. We show one example of that with the Stater Brothers case, and that's depicted behind me. In the 2000s, 12 black employees of Stater Brothers Warehouse sued Stater Brothers. It was handled by Diane Ross, civil rights attorney here in Riverside, because of discrimination in their ability to gain promotions, in vile kind of racist bigotry within the white workforce, even the Latino workforce within the warehouse of Stater Brothers. These 12 employees withstood a lot of vile kind of attacks. And that's exhibited here, though edited somewhat. You can see in the statement that's posted on the wall. Diane settled that case on their behalf for an undisclosed amount of money, and it changed the entire policy of Stater Brothers. Jack Brown, the founder and owner of Stater Brothers, had argued, was not the founder, but he was the president and the CEO of Stater Brothers at the time, said they had a no tolerance policy for racist bigotry and for discrimination and promotions. That was not the case. She proved that was not the case, but winning that case through a settlement changed that into a real no tolerance policy, according to one of the employees that had sued Stater Brothers at the time. So the fight goes on. This section of the exhibition deals with the integration of the Riverside and San Bernardino County public schools. It was a long time coming, not just here, but in the nation. And that had to happen through law, because prior to Brown versus the Board of Education of the Topeka, Kansas, schools were generally segregated into peoples of color, particularly black people, black children, in white schools. The giant mural of the bigger-than-life friend of mine, Dell Roberts, is important because he stood with the president of the Riverside School Board in the very first ever effort to voluntarily create a voluntary busing program to integrate a large school district, which was the Riverside Unified School District. It came about only after the burning of a predominantly segregated black school, Lowell School on Victoria Avenue, which was burned. It was obviously arson. After that, the president of the school board, Art Littleworth, a local attorney, decided they had to do something about this. Riverside had always had pretty much a good relationship with the Black community and Black leadership, but they knew they had to do something about this now. And so they led the battle to integrate the Riverside Public Schools, Riverside School District. It came a decade later with San Bernardino in the integration of their public schools. Here are some of the great educators in the battle. Dale Roberts, you see here, but he was Mr. Roberts for all the students at Poly High School, where he was the disciplinary dean, and he was kind of the great uncle of all the Black and other students of color, including Burnell Butler and his brothers. Woody Rucker Hughes, John W. North High School. She has a post office. The main post office of Riverside is named after her. These are real successes. And Dr. Margaret Hill at San Bernardino, Lula Mae Clemens. Renee Hill, now on the far right, is the current superintendent of Riverside Unified School District. So that grows out of board versus, or Brown versus the Board of Education. Here's the issue, though, and why the battle continues. This section of the exhibition deals with that. The fact that during radical Reconstruction up until 1877, after the Civil War, many communities in the South, power structure had been taken over by Black people. Well, the battle for fair representation continues even after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which incidentally is under assault. Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act today has been gutted by the current Supreme Court, the Chief Justice saying we don't need it anymore. So the battle goes on for fair representation. What we have here in this exhibition, though, are examples of success. First, the mayor of Rialto, Deborah Robertson. Rialto was once totally controlled by the white majority community. We have the first Black representative on a district appeals court of the state of California, and that's Richard Fields, who presides right here in the 4th District Court in Riverside. What you see here is a photograph of the Fontana Ku Klux Klan marching in regalia, except for their hoods, in 1981 against fair housing and integrated neighborhoods. This is 1981. Fontana was the home of the California Ku Klux Klan and even the Hells Angels right up through most of the 20th century. Fontana is where O'Day Short and his family were burned out of their new home in 1947. Here's the irony now today in the issue of fair representation. The woman you see on Black Voice is the current mayor of Fontana, Aquanetta Warren. I think she's in her 3rd term, setting a new path for the once home of the California Ku Klux Klan. Fair representation. It counts at the local level, at the county level, at the state level, and certainly at the national level. Well, the one piece of original art we have in this exhibition came about because Rufus Fleming, the artist, was on our exhibition planning team. And he promised us he would do a painting that represented the framework and the theme of the exhibition. And he did that. It occurred to us that this institute, like every other major history exhibition, history museum, and organization like this, are really important because they have a role in creating social justice and creating that more perfect union that President Obama liked to talk about from the preamble to the Constitution. They're not simply reliquaries where we house items of the past. They use those items and they use the stories from the battles throughout our own history in the effort to create that more perfect union, to put a spotlight on contemporary issues. And that's what we hope to do with the inaugural exhibition, to meet the expectations of the Civil Rights Institute.